My name is Chito Siami, and I'm an investment principal in Emergence Investment Managers. And we have invested in the water and sanitation sector. And we'll be talking to you today about the future of water in Africa, sustainable solutions for water management. Africa appears to have abundant water resources. And on the face of it, you'd think that there's no threat to sustainability of these water resources, but there are a number of issues that affect the availability of water, including natural phenomena and human factors. We're going to focus today on the financing of investments in water supply and sanitation, something that we're familiar with and we've done in South Africa quite extensively. But before that, just a few pointers on some of the issues faced by the continent, including water scarcity, inappropriate governance in terms of institutional arrangements in managing national and transnational water basins. Only 5% of rural Africans have access to piped water, and the level of maintenance of the existing water systems is also not enough or not sufficient. We see a lot of withdrawal of water sources, heavily skewed towards agriculture. Think about over 80% of Africa's water is drawn for agriculture. And in recent times, if I could give an example of Cape Town, during the droughts the 3 years of drought leading into 2018, you saw, even though the agriculture sector contributed only 4% to only 4% of the province's economy, during the drought period, you had 25 to 40% subsidization of the sector. And this can be applied to the rest of the country and probably the rest of the continent. In Egypt, for instance, on the Nile, the government uses subsidized water as a means to stop extensive rural migration. Coming back to Cape Town on the topic of variability of climate and rainfall, we saw a severe once in 300-year drought in the 3 years leading to 2018. In those years, there was a 27% decline in water stored in major dams. And this was exacerbated by the province not investing sufficiently given the increase in population. So you had an increase in demand and a severe drought hitting the province. And this is, and just switching to South Africa as an example, and a lot of these points can be applied to the rest of the continent, but you have a lack of water infrastructure, especially in the rural areas. You have agriculture taking up a lot of water that could go to communities. And you have a lot of, for existing infrastructure, you have a lot of losses. About 1.5 billion cubic meters of water a year is lost due to faulty piping infrastructure in South Africa alone. So what we have been able to do through our funds is invest in 2 concessions, Siza and Silulumanzi, based in KwaZulu-Natal and Mbombela in South Africa. And I'll take you through just some of the lessons that we've learned investing in these concessions in terms of improving supply of water, reducing wastage, etc. So the 2 concessions were a 30-year concession started in 1999, and I basically refurbish, operate, and maintain. So we will be handing them back to the government in the next 7 years. Basically, they serve a population of 460,000 people, pipeline networks of over 1,500, but with water losses drastically reduced. But this wasn't always the case. The CESA, and I'll just show you now some of the measures that were put in place to improve the water losses. So at the time of inheriting the CESA concession, for instance, which is based in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, you had 50% water losses. So basically you would take water from source and 50% of it was lost before it went into communities. And a number of measures had to be put in place to ensure that this is reduced to the 10 to 20% that we see today. Basically, the network was very old and neglected, frequent water interruptions, and the quality of water was incredibly poor. And the main measures, if they could be summarized, were starting to collect data and focusing where you apply resources to improve the supply. So logging pressures and flows, pressure management of pipes to avoid bursts, inspecting leak detections, and monitoring budgets. So the key driver for replacement of pipeline, you can't replace all of it at once. So the key driver for replacement of pipelines became burst histories, just knowing where the bursts were happening and where you were at risk, and applying resources to those areas. Managing pressure to avoid bursts. So installing VSD, variable speed drives, on the pumps, overloading the pipelines during the day. And collecting a lot of data for water losses. So you need to know where you're losing water and why. And the water loss percentage graph here from 1999 to 2020, and it stayed at that 10% level for CESA, speaks for itself. What we saw in the first 5 or so years is this drastic reduction by just applying those measures that have been mentioned. In addition to maintenance of the network, the concessions have experienced other challenges, including drought. For CESA, the sole source of water since 1999 was the Hazelmere Dam. And if you recall, in September 2014, we saw the dam coming down to critical levels because of El Nino. And the concession company had to respond. And basically, when these restrictions came out, there were considerations on what the best response should be: boreholes, river obstruction, or desalination. And all of these, in one way or another, came short of what was needed. The amount of water that you could produce from boreholes was insufficient for the number of people in the area. And the cost of taking water to the communities using tankers had ballooned with no corresponding revenue for it. River extraction was not sustainable during the drought, and desalination as an option was too expensive, but also we had to consider the high operating cost going forward. And when your water comes back to you, mothball the plant because it's expensive to maintain. And the alternative that was put in place was basically to recycle water, and a number of tests were done. A lot of community engagement was done, and on my slides here is just some of the quality that we saw of water coming through from the wastewater that we were able to recycle and put back into the system. So it was passed the SANS tests for drinking water quality, and this has since replaced about 20% of capacity. So very efficient way to supplement the river water that we use to supply to the communities. And this is just a diagram showing what the plant looks like. If I could move, this is what it initially looked like. 97% of homes participated in surveys and we're okay with the reuse of water. So a lot of community buy-in. It's a simple arrangement, as you can see, doesn't take up too much space. And this should eventually replace about 30% of demand by mid this year. So very sustainable. We're just using water that we already have coming out of the sewer system and back into the communities. So in conclusion, I think you could say that these public-private partnerships can work for the sector. We've seen improved water losses at operations versus the rest of the country, higher efficiencies leading to cost reductions and better service delivery, not just to indigent customers, but to all customers. And it's a more sustainable model. And I think that picking the right technologies for the different regions, not just in South Africa, but the rest of the continent, it contributes to a sustainable supply of water. And that's our presentation.